to another episode of Closing the Gap. My name is Maurice Schill and I'm the founder of JuJu. My goal with this show is to make the wealth of knowledge and experience business leaders, experts, and innovators have accumulated over the years on the subjects of leadership, collaboration, and appreciation more accessible and available to you. My hope is that in so doing, I can help you close the gap between where your skills currently are and the ones you know you need to develop to become a better leader, a better team member, and a better person. Now, my guest today is Emily Jaksch. She is the founder of HR Gurus and Generation Us, two agencies based here in Melbourne, helping businesses of all sizes implement better and more effective HR practices. We start the conversation by exploring where her fascination with people came from and the series of events and moments that have led her to where she is today. One thing is clear to me: Emily has a deep passion for people and applying that knowledge to help us become better collaborators and innovators. Now we explore two of her big passions at the moment: purpose-led leaders and their importance in today's business age, as well as millennials. Now, because she has done her own research, she has such a wealth of knowledge on millennials and shares some of those lessons and insights with us. She definitely challenges some of my own thinking on the matter and even left me having to apply some of the lessons as a millennial myself. Now, I hope that you enjoy this conversation just as much as I did. It's insightful, it's entertaining, it's moving. And so without further ado, I bring you Emily Jaksch. Emily, thank you very much for joining us on Closing the Gap. I was at an event of yours a couple of weeks ago now and really enjoyed the session on feedback and thought, well, here's someone who can probably share a lot more insights into HR. And so I invited you on the show, so thank you for joining us.
No problem, thanks for having me.
I want to start with your background. First question pretty much is, how did you get to starting HR Gurus?
Cool, so where do I start? So I guess it's probably pertinent to talk about my dad. First of all, he was a big influence in my life. So my dad was actually extremely intelligent. He was really gifted as a child, and my grandparents were working class, and he was walking at 8 months. He was talking at 10 months, and by 4 years old he could have like an adult conversation. So when he started prep, they realised that he was gifted. He was already reading and writing, and he could memorise entire books at the age of 5. And they decided to put him up to grade 1, and he breezed through primary school. And then when he got into grade 6, the school recommended that he apply for a part scholarship, so he did that. And he aced the entrance exam and went to De La Salle. But what happened was my grandfather had to work 3 jobs because it was only a part scholarship to send him to that school. And it started off really well, but I think that they just really couldn't deal with him because he was so intelligent, and then he started becoming very disruptive and argumentative and started challenging all the priests who were the teachers.
As you would do.
As you would do. And looking back now, kids like him, they probably say they've got ADHD or some kind of, disorder. But he was just highly intelligent and just didn't really like the really strict system of the school that he was in. It didn't really fit with him as a person. And what ended up happening was he rebelled to the point where he ended up getting kicked out. So in year 10, he was really, really angry and disappointed with the whole system of education and didn't want to go back to another school, even though he was highly intelligent. And the school basically said that he could do whatever he wanted. Could have been a doctor, a lawyer, and he actually really wanted to be a lawyer. But instead, he got an apprenticeship with General Motors, Holden, and he started work there, but I think he always regretted it, and he carried that regret around with him his entire life, and it really impacted on him personally, and it impacted on our family and the way that he treated my mum and me and my brother. And it just, as it does, your parents essentially imprint on you their values, beliefs, and their, perspective on the world. And so I always felt like that rich people were bad, that we always felt like the underdog a little bit. Like I remember going to school and being teased because I had Aerosport sneakers on. My mum didn't work, so we were a one-income family, which doesn't really exist anymore. And so that really shaped my perspective of the world, but it also shaped who I was as a person. So because I was always mediating between my parents, I became the mediator and the rescuer. So that's the kind of role that I took on, and that's kind of why I went into human resources or studying human behaviour. And I also wanted to be the first person in my family to go to uni because my dad didn't get that opportunity, and he always regretted it, and he kind of was putting a lot of pressure on me to do that, and I really wanted to make him proud. And when I finished year 12 and I got a really good mark, I wanted to study anthropology or psychology, and my dad said that that was a stupid idea. So he convinced me to study commerce, and that's when I did a commerce degree, but I majored in marketing and human resource management. And I really wanted to work with people. I wanted to help people. I thought that HR was all about making a difference and transforming people and all of that kind of stuff. But you soon realise when you go into corporate HR that is not the case. That's not really what HR is about in most organisations. But that really shaped what I did early on. And then I now realise that my whole focus on helping people become purpose-led is because my dad never got to fulfil his personal purpose. So it's a real driver for me that I want to make sure that I'm living my purpose, because I don't want to do what my dad did and live with regret. But also I don't want anybody else to have to live like that, because it's so sad that my dad could have been whatever he wanted. Like, he literally has a photographic memory. He's so smart. He's like the smartest person I know, but he's really unhappy and unfulfilled because he never got to reach the heights that he possibly could have. He kind of gave up from that. He made a bad choice, and then he carried it around his entire life, and I think a lot of people do that.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story from the book Outliers. I'm not sure if but that is sort of very similar, and I think there's definitely something as when there's not the right support structures or the right, even someone to tell you, hey, don't quit, keep going. It can make a big difference. So it's fantastic. So when you first got into HR, what was sort of one of the biggest disappointments or letdowns, where sort of your perception of what it could be in this perfect world got hit with what it actually is?
God, I mean, my first real HR job was working at the Royal Bank of Scotland in London. So when I graduated in 1998, which is quite embarrassing to say that out loud, but anyway, long time ago, 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, we were coming out of the end of a recession, so not the GFC, but there was a recession before that. Most people don't even remember it. Yeah, there we go. So there were no graduate jobs. And so my first two jobs out of uni aren't even on my resume, which is like, they're actually really embarrassing. The first job that I had was working for a guy who owns a number of nightclubs and the men's gallery. I don't know, does that even exist anymore?
Here or in London?
The men's gallery is in, like, I'm talking about in Melbourne, so sorry, I'm skipping around. So when I first finished uni, I took a marketing job in Melbourne. And yeah, it was the guy who owned the men's gallery, which is a strip club, and a whole bunch of nightclubs that used to be called the Tunnel nightclub, which is one of Melbourne's most famous nightclubs from back in the day. But it was when the rave scene started becoming more prevalent, so people weren't going to pubs and going and watching bands. They were more so wanting to go and watch electronic music, so his clubs were empty. So we hired all these graduates to basically come and tell him what was going on and how he could fix his business. So that was my very first job, and it was horrible. We worked in an office right next to the men's gallery, and we had meetings in the boardroom, which was above the men's gallery. So here I was, a 21-year-old young female.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, walking in and seeing these women, stripping, and I'd never been exposed to that before. And it was really weird because he was a Scientologist. So he used to try and convert everybody who worked there.
As they do.
Yeah, and so that was bizarre. And also you could smoke in the office, so it was just really weird. So that was my first job, and he essentially got all of the information. We developed a marketing plan for him on how to save his business, and then he sacked us all 2 weeks before Christmas. So that was my first job. And then my second job after that, I took a job at the Excelsior Hotel as the marketing and promotions manager, and my job was to try and get people to gamble more money. I just have to stand there on a microphone. So that was awful. And then my friend moved to London and said, hey, there's heaps of jobs in HR over here, you should come over. So I told my boyfriend I was leaving and left my friends and my family, sold all my stuff, and I moved over there, and within a week I had a job at the Royal Bank of Scotland. So my first job was just amazing, to work in a big company like that and just get exposed to all facets of the business. And it was like a HR team of 300 people, and they had heaps of money.
Wow.
So my first exposure to HR was quite exciting and amazing, and we looked after the financial markets sector of that business, so very colourful, interesting people. I mean, I sometimes would go to the toilet and there'd be people snorting lines of cocaine in there.
The good old 80s and 90s.
Yeah, it's like, what's going on? Like, it was bizarre. So yeah, and everyone used to, like at lunch, everyone used to just get blind drunk. Like, it was crazy. And they just had so much money. We used to go out all the time, and someone from the office would pay for it. It was kind of like Suits, but different.
Yeah, or Mad Men style.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So that was my first real job in HR, and I loved that. It was amazing. But then September 11 happened, and so the economy kind of crashed. I was working in the financial market sector. I got scared because we actually got evacuated when it happened, because they thought that they were going to bomb the financial district of London as well. And I just didn't really want to be there. I remember going home on the train, and just everyone was just so terrified. And if anyone looked Middle Eastern, everyone was just staring at them. Like, if anyone had a backpack and was Middle Eastern, everyone was literally like not wanting to stand near them. It was really bizarre. So I decided to come home, and I remember catching a British Airways flight, and there was literally 10 people on the plane. Like, I had the whole economy section to myself. Had 4 seats. It was pretty cool, but kind of scary.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a pretty crazy background story. I'm sure there's lots of moments and experiences which probably at the time didn't seem awesome, but probably built your character. And, so I guess the interesting bit for me is I started off this because my younger brother helped me realize 2 things. One is how important relationships are in our life, and that's really a key thing. And he also taught me how important appreciation was within a relationship, and letting the other person know that you care for them, you respect them, you're there to support them. And so, although I love the whole subject of HR teams, how to become a better leader, I really think there's a big part around it within the relationships themselves, whether they are personal relationships in a work environment or professional. And I'm going to try and refrain from talking a lot about appreciation, but I do ask all of my guests, because it's a very vague topic, what appreciation means to them.
What appreciation means to me? So I think appreciation is feeling like you're heard, or that you're understood, and that you're acknowledged for not only the outcome but your efforts. I think it's really important to do that. And in our business, we have a rewards program that's based around our values, so reinforcing the values of our company, and also it's peer driven, so it's really centered around not just a manager giving someone appreciation or acknowledgement, of everybody giving that to each other, because I think it's really important that it comes from all different angles, and lots of different people have different needs around how they want to be appreciated, and it's really important to understand what that is. Like for me, I like to be appreciated in a group setting. I like being the centre of attention. That's great for me, but for other people, they absolutely hate it. So
that would be one of my worst ways, and I think absolutely you're right. There are many different ways. Did you find, I mean, from your first couple of jobs, I'm guessing the level of general appreciation, especially seeing that you got fired a couple of weeks before Christmas, that's a pretty big move. To me, that also is a sign of no respect and no appreciation at all.
Yep.
How have you seen that play out in different businesses and apply? I mean, then the financial sector is a completely different industry. So what are some of the interesting differences you've seen?
It's interesting because depending on the organisational culture that you're working within, that really drives how they embed appreciation or don't embed appreciation into what they do. I mean, the Royal Bank of Scotland, they embedded appreciation in the form of financial rewards, like you could get free lunch, so they provided lunch for people. Every floor had a fridge with cans of Coke and chocolate bars, and every morning there was a massive fruit platter that was there, and they would just splurge money, just throw money around. And I guess if that's what you're looking for in terms of appreciation, great environment to be in. For me, it was exciting for the first couple of months, but then the novelty kind of wore off. And then when I came home, my first job was at General Motors Holden. So the culture there is really interesting. I think their culture around appreciation and acknowledgement is more so around learning and development, so providing people with development opportunities, providing people with learning opportunities, which I loved because that's one of my highest personal values is personal growth. So I really loved working in that environment. Having said that, Holden is it's a US owned company, and I found it quite frustrating working in they call it a matrix organisation, because no offence to Americans, but they quite often don't really understand the nuances of each country's culture. So what they would do was create things in the US, and then they just basically enforce that it gets rolled out in Australia. And a lot of the stuff that they rolled out was so American and so wanky that we just couldn't use it. And I used to get in trouble all the time for changing things into Australian language, because just the way that they speak doesn't really resonate, particularly with people in a blue-collar environment. They'd just be staring at us going, what the heck are you talking about? So that was a really interesting environment to work in. I loved working at Holden. In 5 years, I had 5 different jobs. So for me, that was a great place to be because I really was hungry for that personal growth. For some other people, that's not what they're looking for, though, so I think it really depends. Then from there, I worked at Wesfarmers, and so their massive focus is around commerciality. So they are really big on training people in how to read financials and how to make everything commercial. So that was also an amazing environment to work in, really dynamic, a lot of really smart people, and just the way that they operated that business was really interesting. And the CEO that I reported to, he really believed in culture, and I implemented an amazing culture program there that was called Get Fit. And then we did a pilot in my region, and then he rolled it out to the rest of Australia, which was probably one of the proud moments in my career. And then when they purchased Coles, they stole him, and he was the CFO of Coles. And then they appointed this guy, I probably shouldn't say his name out loud, from Boston Consulting, and he didn't believe in people or HR, and he just cut all of the money that was funding all of the projects, and then I left within like 2 weeks.
Well, yeah, that's, as they say, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers or
Correct.
people.
Yeah.
It does make a big impact, and awesome. I think which is a good segue to the next part of our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
When you got that new boss from Boston Consulting Group and you left. Was that when you then went in to start your own business and HR careers?
No, so I had one more corporate job. So I then went and worked in the superannuation industry. So that was very different. And that was a really cool role. I was appointed the executive manager of HR for Host Plus Superannuation. So that was my first executive role where I was reporting directly to a CEO and a board. So that was an amazing experience. And I did that for 3 years and I got to build a HR team. But what I realised was that I really like building HR functions, but then I don't want to really do the maintenance. I get bored. I like creating stuff.
Same here.
Yeah, so, and also I just felt like I wasn't really living my purpose or my values, and I was just exhausted. Working in corporate HR is a tough gig. It's like a lot of the time it's wheeling the HR bitch to do the dirty work of other managers who don't want to step up and lead their own people, and so you get to be the executioner, the deliverer of bad news. They want you to performance manage people because they don't want to do it themselves, and so you're just really doing other people's dirty work, and then you're probably the most hated person in a company sometimes. You know, I've been called human remains and all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, it does get a bad rap, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
What's, I mean, you could probably go through a whole list of this and we could talk until the cows come home about this, but what are some of the big mistakes you find a lot of managers are making around dealing with people, around managing their teams?
Sure. So probably the biggest mistake I see all of the time is people not being honest and not managing people when things aren't going well. So they just avoid it, and then when it gets really, really bad, they want somebody to come in and fix it for them. So we have new clients that ring us and say, oh, hey, I've got this poor performer, they've been poor, you know, their performance has been terrible for the last 12 months, we're over it, we just want you to get rid of them. It's like, okay, so do you have any documentation? Have you spoken to the person? Have you given them opportunities to improve? No. But it's been going on for 12 months. And it's like, well, firstly, that's really unfair. Secondly, the person probably has absolutely no idea that they're not performing. And thirdly, that's a key function of your job, and now you want me to come in and rescue you. So I think that a lot of leaders that I work with, they want the title, but they don't actually want to be a leader. And in a lot of the training I do, I say, look, this is the hardest job you are ever going to have. And some of you are not going to cut it. Some of you, this is just not the right thing for you. And, you know, I used to believe that leaders were born. Some people were just innately born to lead. But what I've now learned is that leadership is something that you work at and that's developed, and it's a commitment. It takes discipline, and it takes an open mind and a willingness to be vulnerable and be uncomfortable and do really hard shit. That is part of your job description as a leader, and some people just don't want to do that. So, you know, they spend a lot of time blaming the people that work for them or throwing them under the bus, and you know, we now have a lot of issues with I do a lot of work around millennials, so I have a lot of clients ringing me going, oh, what do we do with the millennials in our workplace? They're really difficult to manage, they want all these things, it's all about them. And so we've got a bit of a friction here, and then we've got a lot of millennial leaders stepping up, and they're in a position where they're going to be managing people older than them, more so than any other generation, just because there's so many of them. So it's going to be really interesting times, but one of the key things that I talk about with the leaders that I work with is the importance of being purpose-led. And that doesn't mean that you have to have a purpose, something like, you know, I'm going to cure cancer, or I'm going to, you know, defeat climate change. It's just about working out your why and what makes you tick, and why you're passionate about these things, and how you use that to determine your leadership story. Because being an authentic leader is knowing who you are and having self-awareness and using your story to define what kind of leader that you want to be.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a bit more about purpose-led leaders, and how you got to identifying that as a problem. I guess it has a relation to some of the things managers are doing and exactly not having that willingness or the courage to be vulnerable or to be honest.
Yep.
One of the things, before I ask you about that, I just wanted to jump into something you said around the engagement people have at work, right? Mm-hmm. So not telling someone that they're not performing for a year and then just wheeling in HR to come and fix that. To me, and maybe this is, I'm just viewing it from my lens, but it seems like if that was a friend of mine who was doing something and who in some way I cared about, or maybe just someone I know, I would at some point tell them, or at least try and help in some way. And it fascinates me that when it gets to work, there's sort of this disconnect, and it's almost like, well, we're not really people anymore, we're just employees or machines almost. And I was just, would love to hear sort of your thoughts on perhaps why that is, or where that comes from, and why people switch off in some ways.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that things are definitely changing, but the old school thinking around relationships at work is that the manager was the manager, and you weren't allowed to have personal relationships with your subordinates, and that you couldn't be friends with them, and that you had to have this kind of
hierarchy.
And that there had to be some distance between your relationship, because what if you had to performance manage them? I think that millennials and young people don't think like that, and in fact they come to work and their work friends are their family, and we spend more time with the people at work than we do with our own families sometimes. So I think that the world is changing, and the focus around leadership is around being an authentic leader. Like, gone are the days where you had to go to work in a suit and pretend to be somebody that you're not. And I think that some older people and older generations are really struggling with that concept, and they're actually a little bit jealous. And if I'm really honest with myself, my whole fascination with millennials was born out of a little bit of jealousy and a bit of hatred, because I was really struggling to work with them in my own businesses, and my clients were struggling. And when I started kind of unpacking what they want and what makes them tick, this whole thing about purpose kept coming up, because young people want to have a job where they feel on fire for their work, and that they feel like they're making a difference and they're having a purpose. And my generation and baby boomers, I'm Gen X, were told that you can't have both. Your job is your job. That can't be your passion. So, very few people get to do that, like elite sports people, or 1% of the population can actually have a job where it's their purpose. Whereas millennials started challenging that, and then that challenged my whole thinking around it. And I think that's where the difference in the new leader compared to the old school Donald Trump style. He's like probably the typical archetype of a dominant, command control leader, and that's just not gonna cut it these days.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in a way, it's sort of the old habits and old ways of doing things just sort of slowly fading out, and that just takes some time until it'll be a different way of doing things, and then probably in 20 years there'll be a whole new problem, and millennials will be the ones that are doing weird things where what is that? Is it Gen Z?
Gen Z, yep.
Gen Z all of a sudden are not working well. Who knows what's going to happen?
We could have a completely robotic workforce. Who knows?
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence. Like, you look at the future of work. I saw this stat the other day: 7 in 10 jobs that exist today are no longer going to exist in 2050. I think it was. So that's not that long away. That's 30 years away. So that means that the jobs of the future have not even been created yet. And that is terrifying. If you think about the gap between baby boomers and millennials, I think the gap is technology. So Gen X, I'm a Gen X, or I call myself a Zennial because I'm on the cusp. And I feel like I'm kind of part millennial, part Gen X. and they actually have defined a micro generation for Millennials.
Okay.
And I feel like we're the bridger of gaps because we remember what it was like to have no technology, and then we were kind of born into an analog world that transformed to a digital world. So we're really the first like digital natives in a way. But the baby boomers, a lot of them haven't really embraced the new world, and they don't get it, and they don't understand that young people are just everything. You can do everything on your phone, and there's an app for absolutely everything now. And for baby boomers, they don't get it. They think it's a waste of time. That you're all just screen obsessed, crazy people.
There's something definitely about even I with the screens. My parents were very good, so they were very disciplined. It was sort of like 1 hour screen time a day.
Yep.
Which I'm really glad they did.
Mm-hmm.
But even now, I look at some of the younger people, and they're spending 12 hours a day watching 3 different screens, or watching people play video games and stuff like that. And I'm like, this can't be good. But at the same time, knowing all of the great stuff that video games and all of the connectivity has brought, who knows what's going to come out of that. So I think it's, you never know. It might actually be something good in disguise.
I hope so. I mean, they used to say the same thing about television, that it was rotting our brains. So who knows? I do think that there's probably too much reliance on screens. In the research that I do on millennials, so I've done a research study that was a quantitative study, but I'm now doing a qualitative study. So I'm interviewing millennial entrepreneurs, really successful millennials, and trying to unpack and unlock their mindset, because there's some really common threads to all of their stories. And one of the things that I see with all of the really successful ones is they've kind of hacked the system in terms of mindset. So they're extremely disciplined. They've got grit. They get up at between 5 and 6 a.m. every morning. They do exercise. They do mindfulness. They live a really balanced life, and they've got an amazing ability to learn new stuff and be really malleable. And I think that that's what sets these young entrepreneurs apart. Like the trajectory to success now is fast tracked compared to what it used to be 20, 30 years ago. If you're starting a business, even when I started my business 10 years ago, it was a lot harder than it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. I was at a seminar the other day, and they were just talking about how the whole business cycle, it used to take you a year to write the business plan, get everything set up, 3 years to set it up, then you have 20 years, and now it's like the space of a week or sometimes a couple of months. You can set up a business, try it, fails or it succeeds, and you just keep going.
Exactly.
I think that's something around that as well. What are besides these commonalities between millennial entrepreneurs, what are some of the other really interesting things you found out when or while studying millennials?
Well, I found out that they're probably very misunderstood, that the whole media representation of them is completely untrue. I mean, stereotypes don't come from anywhere, but I think it's grossly inflated. And I'm really passionate about changing that narrative, because I think a lot of that comes from a place of fear of the unknown, and fear about and what they're doing, and also the whole jealousy thing that I talked about before. You hear baby boomers say, you guys have got it so easy. In my day, we had it was so different, it was so much harder, blah, 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 blah. We could argue that that's not true. If you think about their ability to buy a house based on earning a working class wage, we're never going to be able to do that. So anyway, we could go into that another time, but it's a whole other story. But some of the interesting things are that millennials are really, really into coaching. So from a leadership perspective, they want to coach. They don't want to work in a command and control environment. They want their manager to actually respect them and be their friend. They want to build a relationship with them. They want to come to work and do a job that has purpose, and their values are very important to them. So if they're working in an environment that doesn't align with their values, they will leave. And this whole thing about them being job hoppers is not true. So from my research, a huge proportion have been in their current job between 2 to 3 years, and an even bigger proportion have been in their jobs for 3 to 5 years. So, and all of the research now shows that 3 years in the same job, like doing the same job, is the maximum that you should be in a job. Because after 3 years, you become bored and stagnant and unmotivated.
And I mean, that includes if you get a promotion, as in, or like literally the same job, same company. Does that change if you're getting promoted and say over the course of 10 years actually touched a lot of different parts or gotten new responsibilities?
I think that if you get promoted and you're moving into different job roles within a company, then that's okay. But if you literally have been in a job for the same job, doing the same thing for 3+ years, your motivation levels, according to research, starts to deteriorate, and it makes sense. So a lot of the clients I work with are in the small to medium business space, and they just always lamenting about, oh, millennials, we just don't hire them because we need people who are going to stay for 5 years. I'm like, well, you're first of all deluded. Second of all, your business model is flawed. Third of all, millennials are going to make up 2/3 of our workforce by 2025. So
can't choose anymore.
It's just not going to work for you. And I see those businesses falling further and further behind because millennials are the ones who know what consumers want. They're the ones who are innovating, and they have an entrepreneurial mindset that can't be taught. And if you don't have that in your business, you are not going to be able to compete in whatever market it is. And so many service industries are under threat at the moment because of artificial intelligence. So lawyers, for the first time, are really under threat because they're writing AI programs that can give people amazing advice based on trawling case law. So HR advice could be something of the past. Accountants, financial planners. I saw a report the other day saying that a huge proportion, I think it was 43% of small business owners in Australia are millennials, and something like 1 in 3 were not happy with their accountants, and we're going to be looking for a new accountant. So that tells me that the accounting industry really needs to pull their finger out and do something different because their business model is not really going to serve what the new generation entrepreneur wants.
Yeah, there's definitely a changing landscape, and encountered in a couple of really great books, the AI race almost.
Cool, that sounds interesting.
And sort of the whole debate of, are they going to replace all of our jobs? Is no one going to have? And again, it's probably something we could have a whole nother discussion about. But essentially, the thing that they recognize is things like HR or accounting or law, which is very rule-based quite often.
Yeah.
All of that's really easy to automate,
Correct.
right? Especially with a bit of AI. The things that aren't are the creative processes, and even that they're getting into.
Yeah.
But leading people, for example,
Exactly.
is definitely not something that is easy for a machine to do. And so I guess focusing and encouraging people to be more purpose-led and becoming leaders and not just a manager or doing a task is probably really important.
It is, yep.
So I want to get into a bit more around what you've seen, what some of the traits that we talked a bit about millennials and their more personal habits and traits that help them succeed. But I wanted to know if you've seen or identified any things that are anything that is, that's why we have to go pro. If you've identified anything that is consistent across workplaces that do that lead people really well, that have great art, that have great culture.
Yep.
And what some of 3 or 4 things are that they consistently do well.
Yes, that's an interesting question. it's probably easier to say what I see that doesn't go well, but anyway, no.
Let's start with that.
No. When companies, I think, perform well, and the ones that really stand out for me are organisations that are really values-based. So they really understand what's our mission, what are our values, and they embed that in everything they do from a people perspective. And all of the people know what the values are, and they're constantly referred to. They're what's used to make decisions. So in a lot of the reading that I've done personally, when we make decisions, we should always go back to our compass, our moral compass, to say, okay, well, is this aligned with my values? And businesses who do that really well, like Zappos, I don't know if you've heard of Zappos, it's one of my favourites. So using that model with our clients is something that we sometimes look at if it's the right kind of fit. We're all about modelling excellence. So we do a lot of work helping businesses define their why and then their values, because if you don't have that, that's when people start making up their own, and that's when your culture starts getting diluted. Some other things are communication. So for me, I believe that there's no such thing as too much communication. So being really transparent about everything, not having all these closed doors and smoke and mirrors, being transparent about your financials, being transparent about decision making, just creates a really open, great culture. And then the other thing is about investing in development and investing in your leaders, and investing in people who live the values, not necessarily the people who've been there the longest or who have the best resumes or whatever it might be. So having a belief that the people who live your values are the ones who are going to take your organisation forward. And if you have people that aren't living your values, very quickly dealing with that by either performance managing them or asking them to leave because they're just eroding your culture.
So I've done a lot of personal work, and I've been very fascinated by that subject and how it reflects on the brand as well. But one of the things I've noticed is, you need to sort of get to know yourself first, and we can talk about all of these values that companies might have, and a lot of companies do have values, but they're often from a values book where it's sort of like integrity, and everyone's like, yeah, well, be integral, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
And what I've found is that the more I learn about myself and understand about my own values, the more I can actually relate to them.
Yeah.
Which brings me to, and I guess it's part of the discussion of, can people change? And especially around values, right? People can learn new skills, they can, but do their values change? And if there is someone who is in your organization who might be a great fit in a lot of ways and gets along with a lot of people, but isn't aligned to the values, are there conversations or ways to go through that so that at least maybe they don't align with all of the values, but they're clear on what they are and know how they fit into that? Or is it really a sort of black and white, if they align to values, that's it? Or is there a process to sort of, because it can be really hard to, where is that line and where is it,
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. So I've studied NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and so in that modality or way of thinking, it's believed that your core values are your core values, and they're formed when you're 0 to 7 years of age, and they're normally formed because you have some negative experiences, and they're formed in a response to moving away from that negative experience. So strangely, when I did all of the work on myself around NLP, I worked out that all of my values I had created because I was running away from being something or doing something that I didn't want. So in that school of thought, it is believed that you can change the alignment or the importance of a value, but you can never change your number one value. So for me, my number one value is independence, and that's because I didn't want to be like my mum, who didn't have any independence, and I didn't want to be like my dad, who was trapped in this crappy job as an electrician. So for me, I really, really wanted to be independent, and that value has served me really well, but it's also grated up against many organisational systems because I want to do things my way and I want to have autonomy. So you can see how I can't change my number one value. There is a process to go through where you can, but it would pretty much tear my whole life apart. So my theory would be if somebody had a very, very high preference or like one of their highest values was competitiveness or competition or winning, and then they were in a culture where it was all about collaboration and teamwork, that was their highest value, they are never ever going to fit into that culture because they're never ever going to get that need met. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And maybe it's because I'm still optimistic, or I see it perhaps differently. And for example, for me, and maybe I haven't done enough digging, but I'm pretty sure for me, the number one value is either freedom or independence. I think very related.
Yep.
But that is because I've had the fortune that my parents grew up all around the world and moved every 3 or 4 years. And so to me, I attach that to just the ability to be able to pack up and leave and go and do what I want.
Yep.
But it came from a very positive background. Perhaps that's a superficial thing I tell myself to hide some of the underlying things. So, I mean, that was one of the things. The other one that I've found is coming back to competition, for example. At times, I am competitive, but the moment the competitiveness is non-aware or subconscious, or I'm not present to it, then I might not be able to use it in the right ways.
Yeah.
Whereas if I do become aware of it, then I understand when it's serving me, when it's not, and how to use that. So, which brings me to another question around awareness and mindfulness. There's been, of course, a lot more people talking about it. There's a huge boom in apps, and the whole field has become much more mainstream. Where do you see that playing into workplaces or for purpose-led leaders? And what do you recommend people do if they do want to access some of those benefits?
Sure, I think it's essentially what's going to transform the new breed of leader is this desire for ongoing personal development and growth, and part of that is being kind to yourself. Like all of the research shows that people who have a daily routine, psychologists have worked out that if you go to bed at the same time every night and get up at the same time in the morning, you're much less likely to have anxiety, depression, and so now people are cottoning on to all of these things, and millennials, they're voracious consumers of this stuff. So I think that we're already seeing that becoming really, really popular and prevalent in workplaces. I mean, I just did a presentation this morning at RMIT to a whole bunch of graduates, and the first hour of this boot camp that they were doing, getting them ready to go out into the big bad world, was mindfulness. So this whole importance of having time for yourself, and my studies of millennials has led me to become very interested in this, because all of the millennials that I interview for my book that I'm writing, who are really, really successful, as I said, they get up at between 5 and 6 a.m. One of them told me to read this book called The 5 a.m. Club, which I read, and I've been doing that for about 6 months, and it's literally changed my mindset. Like, I feel like a different person.
Just by getting up at 5 a.m.?
Yeah, I've always been an early riser, so I was getting up at 20 past 5, but I was getting up at 20 past 5 and then looking at my phone for about 40 minutes and just, scrolling through Instagram, looking at Facebook, then maybe watching some stupid cat videos, just wasting my time. And that was I thought, some alone time in the morning, and then I realised what a waste of time. So now I get up at 5 o'clock, I do 20 minutes of exercise, 20 minutes of journaling or self-reflection, and 20 minutes of meditation every day. And even on the weekends, I do it. So I just literally wake up now and get out of bed. I don't even really need an alarm. And I feel so much better. And the book, you definitely should read it.
Sounds like down my alley.
Yeah, it is all based on research. So it's based on neuroscience. So it's told in a really clever way because it's a story that's told through some characters, but then it's got the research behind it as well. So I think that mindfulness is going to be the new craze that we see permeating leadership, workplaces, everything, which is great because I think that we need to get back to working on ourselves and having that time to be connected and present is so important in a world where we're so overstimulated and overconnected and overworked.
And I think, coming back to the thing I said earlier around there's something good in all of this technology, I think one of the reasons why it's become so popular and it's really, grown exponentially almost, is because with all of this connectivity, there is no more presentness, like everything is always, and I think that's actually driving that. And so it's like what is it called, a bad thing in disguise.
Like an Achilles heel or something.
Yeah, there's something around that, and I think that desire to really get back to just us and our time, and it's maybe a good thing. Technology, we might initially go, oh, this is not good at all, but awesome. So if you had one thing that you could, I don't know what scenario we could set up here, but imagine you could only ever tell a business or a manager one thing to change, or to work on across the board. What would that be? What would be the most priority you recommend?
I think working on yourself, like continuing to work on yourself, and it not being like a thing that you do sporadically, to continually try and upskill yourself, develop yourself, just read voraciously. There is so much stuff out there that you can consume that can expand your mind. I use blink lists, so there's literally no excuse to not be able to read books, and if I really like the book, I normally go and buy it. And I think just like living by your values, like using that to make decisions. And when we do that, we're just so much more aligned with what's going on. And you know when something's rubbing up against your values because you get that feeling, and just trusting that feeling, going, oh, what's going on here? What's coming up for me? Why am I feeling like this? And it's normally because you're being asked to do something that's not in alignment with your values. So whether it's making a decision about sacking someone at work, or signing up a new client and you just doesn't feel right, like just believing and trusting your gut, because it doesn't lie.
Yeah, awesome. I like that. I think it's an important one. What are sort of, we've talked about the 5 a.m. book, and that clearly has had a big impact. Are there any other resources you recommend purpose-led leaders actually look into, or where can they go to start doing some of this stuff? Sure.
So one of my favourite books, I wrote some stuff down in preparation, is Discover Your True North by Bill George. An amazing book, and it focuses on one thing that I love, which is storytelling. So they interviewed hundreds and hundreds of really successful leaders, and they all owned their story. So they all had this story of adversity, but they owned it and had got the learnings and were using that to define what kind of leader they were. So I love that book, and it's still really relevant today, even though it's quite old. Daring Greatly by Brené Brown is really good. Love that book. And then I listen to a lot of podcasts, and then I get ideas to seek out people who are on those podcasts. So I just think it's a really great way to get exposed to lots of different cool people. And the best one is Mind Valley podcast by Vishen Lakhani. Just amazing, like the people that he talks to, and I love what Mind Valley are doing. You can do these short courses online. They're normally 6 to 8 weeks, and they're about $600. So they're just changing the face of education. So you don't need to go to uni and study for 4 years and spend $100,000 to become an X anymore. Like, I just think that we live in such an amazing world where we have all of this education and tools at our fingertips. So why wouldn't you be grabbing on and
And
consuming.
You can do it after. I know Mind Valley pretty well. Is probably what got me into meditation.
Yep.
And his book is really good as well. I think it's a good starting
I haven't read the book. Which book?
The Code of the Extraordinary Mind,
Yes.
I think it's called.
Yep. And I've actually just started doing Vision's 6-phase meditation every
Been
morning.
doing that
It's
for a while,
amazing. Yeah. How
yeah,
good do you feel?
Highly recommend it.
Yeah.
I've been doing it almost 3 years now.
Yeah.
And at first, what I really liked about it was when I first started meditating, it was very much a focus on the breath and try and calm your mind. And the results of that are minimal. Or at first, it's really hard to see how that changes your day.
Totally.
With his, because you're very much focusing on things like appreciation and gratitude, and about yourself, about other things.
Yeah.
It leaves you feeling after the 20 minutes like you've changed your state, and I
Yep.
think it's a really good place for people to start.
Exactly.
Because you see something happening, and now I do a combination and sometimes plug and play, but
Yeah.
it's really good. Really love that.
It's amazing, and that's a really good point, because you can just go onto YouTube and just do 10-minute meditation for finding my purpose, or 10-minute meditation for clearing negative energy. So like whatever you're feeling on the day, because also we're human beings, we like a bit of variety. You shouldn't try and do the same thing every day because you'll just go crazy. Well, some people like that, but I don't. So yeah, just YouTube. You can YouTube anything, really.
Yeah. There's I've got a couple of friends, and I've used the Waking Up app by Sam Harris. It's another great podcast you'd probably really like.
Yep.
But keep trying to get people to use it, because it's really taken my meditation levels in the next, because it's not just the 5 minutes and you sort of go and pick, but you're served something every day.
So they just throw you whatever.
So you get something to work with, and sometimes it's about the breath, sometimes it's metta or gratitude or compassion meditation, and you never really know what you're going to get, but it helps sort of develop all aspects of it,
Cool.
which has helped me, and then I add on top of that the 6-phase one as well.
Awesome.
Before we wrap up, there's 2 more things I wanted to talk about. One, at the sort of beginning of this conversation, you talked around millennials who are going to have to start dealing with older and younger generation, right? It's almost having to think in 2 mindsets. I just wanted to know, and I think because it's clearly something you're really passionate about, what you recommend millennial leaders do, because I see that as well. They're getting into positions of leadership or management, and that's probably going to be one of the biggest challenges, to deal with these different mindsets. So is it something they should understand about these people? What's some advice you have for them?
Sure. So I think the best advice is that we need people from all different generations to be working harmoniously together, because everybody has some value to bring, everybody has a seat at the table, and a lot of big organisations that were created by millennials have realised this and have started employing people from older generations, because when they first started, it was just, it was all their mates, and then they realised that the depth and breadth of experience in the room was pretty shallow. So Airbnb is a really good example of that. They have a really diverse workforce, and it's about understanding that there needs to be a transference of knowledge both ways. The baby boomers and Gen Xers have a lot of experience, and it's all around, I guess, their EQ. So emotional intelligence, I think, comes with age. Like, it takes time to develop through experience, and sage advice is sometimes worth its weight in gold. But what millennials bring to the table is what I call DQ, or digital intelligence, and what we're seeing is a lot of millennials being promoted because of that. But what they lack is that life experience. So surrounding yourself with people from all different backgrounds. I mean, I think that age diversity is just another form of diversity, right? So if you have an organisation that's just filled with young guns, then you're going to have some blind spots. You need to have a balance. So for millennial leaders, it's really understanding that you need to engage with those older generations, utilize their experience, bring them in on conversations and include them, and not write them off and think, oh, well, they're an old codger that I don't really know about this tech thing or whatever it is. They may not know about the tech part of it, but they will know about the consumer history of that product, and it may not be relevant now, but it's still going to add value to the conversation. And Airbnb is a really good example of that. They hired a guy who was from the hotel industry, so bricks and mortar hotels, and he talks about when he first walked into the first meeting and they were talking about some kind of part of the technology of the platform of Airbnb, and someone asked him a question, he had no idea what they were talking about, and he realised very quickly that he was in a different world, but he did still bring knowledge and experience to the table, and they obviously really valued that. So I think that young people need to be respectful, but the older generations also need to be respectful. We need to meet halfway rather than being like.
I think it was just making me think of that movie. I think it's called The Intern.
Yep.
I think it's with Robert De Niro, and
I don't think I've seen it.
It's exactly about that, and of course it's a heartwarming story. And it's pretty much about a 70-year-old guy who's been working in business forever, and I think his wife dies, and so he's really bored and doesn't know what to do, and he decides he wants to go back to work, and he can't of course get any work, so he applies to a tech company or an online, something a bit like Zappos where they sell clothes. And as an intern. And then sort of that's the start of the movie, and it's a really good watch.
I'm gonna have to look that up. Is it on Netflix? Or is it old? Is it new?
No, it's 2017-18.
Oh, okay, cool.
So
I'm gonna check it out.
It's a good watch, and I think it really shows people exactly that discussion, that there is so many lessons and insights you can learn from a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
So that's a fun way to get into that. Okay, before I do my last part, where can let's start with what you're most excited about, what you're currently working on, what you want people to know, and then where people can find out more about that, and if they want to get in touch or get some of your work or research, where can they find you?
Sure, so they can find me on my website www.generationus.com.au, and the research that I've done around millennials is available there. I've got an ebook with a whole bunch of stats in there if anyone's interested in learning more about that. In terms of programs and what we do and what I'm excited about, we do a lot of work with people who are looking to change their careers. So we call it a career reset program for people who hate their jobs or their profession and just feeling completely lost. So that's something that's very, very popular. And then we're currently working on a purpose-led leadership program at the moment. So that's really about helping leaders identify their story and define what kind of leader they want to be and step into that, kind of new realm from being a manager to a leader. So that's something that's coming out soon.
Is that a coaching model, more one-on-one, or is that more where you go and then you help, a whole team or the executive team, for example?
So it's both. So we'll be probably running some public courses, but a lot of the work we do is in an organisation where, a company like Crown may come to us and say, hey, we've got a whole bunch of leaders, we want to put them through a leadership program, and we go in-house. The public course will probably be about 5 days face-to-face, and then there'll be a coaching element to it.
Okay, awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing some more of that.
Thank you.
I'm definitely just as passionate about, I call it more mindful leadership, because I think through that comes purpose as well, but I think there's a lot of alignments. So the last thing I get to do, just more of a fun thing, and feel completely free to say you don't like to do it, but because I focus a lot on appreciation, I give every one of my guests an opportunity to perhaps appreciate someone they didn't get the chance to or forgot, and would like to do that, and we can do that now, and then I take that clip and you can have that and send it to the person.
Wow, awesome. Okay, who would I like to do that for? This is so many people.
We'll do one this time. Maybe
Okay.
next time you'll get another one.
So I'd probably like to thank Jessie, who is my business partner, and we've been working together for about 5 years. And she's just amazing and just makes coming to work so fun, to be working with someone who really is aligned and who gets you, but also does outstanding work. And she's really supportive, and I probably don't tell her enough how valuable she is.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. So
Thank you.
Get that, and I think she's in the room behind us. So,
She is.
hopefully she didn't hear it, and it'll be a surprise. But I always think it's good to finish on something like that.
Awesome.
So thank you very much for sharing all of this with us. We had covered a lot of stuff. I think there's maybe even a chance to have another session and talk about something more particular, because we did have to stay focused. But thank you very much. Do you have any questions for me or anything you wanted to share before we wrap up?
I would like to know more about JuJu, but I don't know if that's something that you want to talk about now. But yeah, I obviously looked at your website and I love the concept. So maybe like a really short and sharp what it's about.
Fair enough. I can try and summarize it. So essentially, it's a platform to facilitate more appreciation within the business, and by making it a bit more fun and by using the concept of a JuJu, it turns appreciation into something that is almost like a unit.
Yep.
So it's very millennial and very tech and new around that. But the idea is just to encourage more of it within businesses. I think it's something that's really lacking, and something when you do it really helps relationships and just all around. So that's what it's really about, and you could call it peer-to-peer appreciation platform. So that's the core of it. But around that, of course, as you probably know, the discussion around what all of that involves in relationships and culture and team just gets so broad, and that's why I started doing these interviews, to have more conversations like this with people, to share that with the world, and just to make it something that more people listen to, watch and talk about.
Awesome. I love it. I love the word JuJu.
Yeah, it's all started from my younger brother, so it's in a way my way of appreciating him for a lot of the. He's a smart cookie as well, and he's taught me a lot of great things. One being, how important relationships are. So
cool. That's awesome.
Very grateful to have him. I think we'll wrap that up.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks for having me.